This is KMTV 3 News Now, live at 10.
There are 917 active hate groups in the United States currently. So the fact that something like this has shown up in Omaha, it was just a matter of time.
A stunning discovery this past weekend in downtown Omaha. Literature or propaganda about a month after Charlottesville. Swastika-laden cards promoting the alt-right movement. Good evening, I'm Craig Nigrelli. Jen is off tonight. Somebody found one at a parking meter at 20th and Farnham. Another on the 10th Street overpass. Reporter Megan Hahn is live in Omaha with details tonight. Megan.
Yeah, Craig, one of the cards was found here in the area of 20th and Farnham. We spoke to people out here today who say they're shocked to hear a group could be encouraging this type of hate speech.
I think Omaha should be a place where everyone should feel accepted.
People in downtown Omaha are shocked to learn about an effort to spread a message of hate using these cards showing a swastika and the phrase alt-right.
It shocks me, but it sickens me. That's all I can say, because it's just the worst thing I can even imagine happening to this world.
For those who are Christian, it ought to be an easy thing to say and to embrace. And that is that supremacy of one race of people over any other race of people is contrary to biblical teaching.
The back of the card reading, America was 90% white in 1950. Now it's 60%. Make America great again. The mayor's office says they received a tip to their hotline on Friday from a woman saying she found the card on a parking meter like this one at 20th and Farnham. Roxanne Nielsen says she was alarmed and concerned when her 16-year-old granddaughter found one of the cards at the 10th Street overpass on Sunday.
I mean, you know, it's the whole thing about free speech and, you know, where do you draw any lines and how do you discuss that in a positive way. And
according to the Southern Poverty Law Center, there are 5 active hate groups in Nebraska, one of which, American Vanguard, has ties to the August Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville that turned deadly.
There are 917 active hate groups in the United States currently. So the fact that something like this has shown up in Omaha, it was just a matter of time.
Maggie Wood with Inclusive Communities says incidents like this are too big to let go, adding there needs to be a bigger dialogue that hate will not be accepted in our neighborhood.
I think there needs to be more conversation around this. The more that we ignore these things, the more likely that they are to happen.
The mayor's office says a complaint of this nature is one of the first kind they've received. Reporting live from 20th and Farnham, I'm Megan Hahn, 3 News Now.
We covered a similar incident back in June, also downtown. A vandal smashed a former Navy sailor's car window on Sunday morning, June 25th, at the corner of 16th and Mike Fahey. Whoever did it left a card with a swastika symbol. It read, "America was 90% white in 1950. It's now 60%. Make America great again." The card also promoted President Donald Trump and listed 3 fringe websites. We interviewed the victim. These were his thoughts.
It won't stop. It never will stop. People will always be ignorant. And that's why I just chose to move forward and not really retaliate, stoop to their level. For me to give them the police.
The incident reported to police. So far, no arrests.
Now, your Weather Alert First forecast.
Well, our work week is off to a quiet, dry, even warm start as high pressure builds in over the area. But all eyes still on the southeast as Irma continues to cause all kinds of concerns. It has moved inland, and while it has decreased in its overall intensity from a tropical storm to a tropical depression, it is still having huge impacts, soaking rains across the southeast, even the potential for flooding and even some severe weather, power outages being reported throughout parts of the Carolinas. As far as the path of the storm and what it's going to continue to do and who it's going to continue to impact, we won't see any effects from the storm system. However, it continues to move across Georgia, into Alabama, into Tennessee and Kentucky through the middle part of the work week and eventually into Illinois. The leading edges of the bands of clouds will actually move into parts of Kansas, but stays away from us. This isn't the only system that we're tracking in the tropics. We also have Hurricane Jose. Jose right now looks like it's going to hang out in the Atlantic Ocean through the weekend, but something we'll be watching very closely.
All right, same topic. Hurricane Irma is now a tropical storm. It left Florida on Monday and pushed north into Georgia and South Carolina. Kenneth Craig has the story from Miami.
Across Florida, a massive rescue and recovery effort is now underway. Hurricane Irma pummeled the Sunshine State with torrential rain and wind for a day and a half, inflicting misery in nearly every county.
My heart goes out to the people in the Keys. I mean, there's devastation. I just hope everybody, survived.
The Florida Keys were among the hardest hit. Irma was a Category 4 hurricane when it made landfall in the islands. They're now littered with destroyed homes and downed trees. 10,000 people rode out the storm there. They now have no electricity or running water and may have to be evacuated.
We can always rebuild it, but hey, live on the ocean, you go out there. Take the chances.
Some 13 million homes and businesses across the state were in the dark on Monday. Officials say it will likely be weeks before everyone is back online. Miami may have been spared a direct hit, but it was still met with hurricane-force winds strong enough to knock down and uproot large trees.
You are looking at the front entry of our house. That's the gate.
Miami residents said they were relieved the city avoided a direct hit from Irma, but they were still stunned by the destruction it caused.
And we figured, hey, tropical storm, no problem. You know, we went through Andrew and we saw nothing like this in Andrew.
Jacksonville is now coping with its worst floods in a century. High tides are expected to make the situation there even worse in the days to come. Kenneth Craig, CBS News, Miami.
Goodness, where do you begin? Hurricane Jose is now churning in the Caribbean as a Category 2 storm. It might affect the East Coast later this week. Much like Harvey in Texas, the Nebraska National Guard has sent manpower to Florida to assist in relief efforts. The Guard tweeted out this. Yesterday, the Nebraska Guard sent UH-72 Lakota helicopters and crews off to Florida for Hurricane Irma relief and recovery operations. And as of tonight, the remaining Nebraska Guard soldiers currently called for Hurricane Irma relief are now on their way to Florida from Lincoln and Grand Island. About 100 Nebraska National Guard troops are deployed in Florida. Nebraska Task Force 1 is in Florida tonight. They are staging for assignment at Eglin Air Force Base near Pensacola. Information is still coming in. It's up to the leaders to see where their help is needed most. Right now, there are lots of units assisting, so coordination is a challenge.
We have 1,300 USAR assets on the ground right now. And that doesn't even include the local jurisdictions and other agencies that are down here assisting Department of Defense assets with National Guard and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of personnel on ground.
If the task force does not get assigned late tonight, they expect to have their assignments tomorrow morning. Bit of a personal note, my younger sister lives in Davenport, Florida. That's southwest of Orlando. She told me today the storm really packed a punch around 1 a.m. this morning. She and her children hunkered down and stayed away from the windows. Tonight her home is pretty much unscathed, but there are lots of trees down in her neighborhood. Here are a couple of pictures. The wicked winds uprooted and snapped large trees like that. 3 News Now reporter Miranda Christian is in South Florida working hard for our sister station in West Palm Beach. Tonight she sent out this tweet, "Hurricane baby, look at this." Justine went into labor last night, stranded by floodwaters. Luckily, some firefighters got to her on time. Meet Sophia Lynn and Irma baby, if you can believe that. The cleanup will take a long, long time in many parts. One Florida native who lives in Omaha is relieved Irma did not hit his relatives too hard in the Panhandle. His name is Rodney Mills. His mother, brother, and 2 sisters live there. They did not evacuate. Fortunately, they avoided the brunt of the storm. Although they've been through stormy weather before, Mills was still very worried.
They kind of talked about what their plans were. They've already bought enough food and water and so forth. They even have a generator. So living in Florida, you got to be prepared.
Mills is waiting to hear back from his brother in Gainesville who experienced Irma this morning. The Omaha man plans to head to Florida later this week to check on everybody in person. Eppley Airfield says tonight all nonstop flights to and from Miami, Tampa, and St. Petersburg tomorrow are canceled. Other flights involving Florida might also be affected. Check with your airline. People in Florida need a lot of support, and so do hurricane survivors in Texas. If you want to help, call 1-800-RED CROSS or visit redcross.org. We have other ways you can give to the relief efforts at our website, 3newsnow.com. Tonight, we remember the lives lost on September 11th, 2001. 16 years ago tonight, the nation was shocked to its core, wondering what in the world happened. This is a time lapse from New York City. The tribute in light. 88 searchlights beam straight into the sky each year, representing the World Trade Center. Closer to home, Bellevue held a tribute at American Heroes Park tonight. Attendees paid their respects to soldiers, firefighters, law enforcement, and EMTs. There was also a ceremony for 24 new Americans.
Rose May 2, Burma. Diamond Say, Burma. Mercy Harry Wei Lee, Liberia.
Be remembered here.
Organizers also remembered thousands of men and women who have died in the wars serving our country. This tweet from the Omaha Police Department and the Able 1 helicopter caught our attention. It's a view of Memorial Park. 2,977 flags bearing the names, ages, and a short bio of every life lost on 9/11. U.S. Senator Deb Fischer issued a statement on the anniversary of the terror attack. She praised first responders and Stratcom's work during the national emergency. She added this: year after year, this day is a reminder of tragedy and tears, but also of the strength and resolve of the citizens of the greatest country on earth. Former Press Secretary Ari Fleischer posted some amazing pictures on Twitter of that fateful day when President George W. Bush and Air Force One stopped at Offutt Air Force Base. The president convened a meeting with the National Security Council via Secure TV in a bunker. Here it is. We landed at Offutt little after 3 and parked next to a doomsday plane. Hollywood never would have thought of that. Here is the scene as we walk toward the entrance of the base. Again, that's from Ari Fleischer on Twitter. In the 16 years since 9/11, America's war on terror has faced new threats and different strategies. The Bush administration went after Afghanistan and Iraq. President Obama decreased troop levels and increased drone warfare. Navy SEALs took out Osama bin Laden. President Trump is now taking a no-holds-barred approach toward ISIS.
President Trump seems to have relaxed the rules a little bit on engaging with Islamic State. So what that means is that one thing that we've noticed is that there's a lot more civilian casualties.
ISIS, which President Obama called Al-Qaeda's JV team, is now coordinating and inspiring terror attacks around the world through its use of social media. Al-Qaeda has focused more of its operations on the Middle East and North Africa. A former Omaha police officer accused of using a stun gun on a mentally ill man who later died is going to trial. Scotty Payne is facing 1 count of felony assault. Zachary Bareheels died after the confrontation at Buc-ee's at 60th and Center in early June. During today's hearing, another Omaha police officer testified that Payne's use of the stun gun 12 times was unjustified. She also called Payne a good man and a good officer. People from Omaha and Council Bluffs weighed in tonight on what to do with all that land and green space along the riverfront. There was an open house at the Holland Center. City officials listened to ideas. Attracting businesses and visitors is a priority after 2 restaurant ventures failed.
And the whole idea is to activate these things and get where people want to be there and they're enjoyable and they're exciting and events can take place there and so forth.
We caught up with people who enjoy the riverfront. Here's what they would like to see built.
I like the park, it's beautiful, but I just hate to see it go into condominiums where people, have to pay $1 million to live there.
Something that I think would be great would be a playground. There are a lot of other attractions here for children, such as the splash pad on the Omaha side, and then they're building one on the Council Bluffs side as well.
The process is expected to culminate this spring. Voters in the Council Bluffs School District will go to the polls tomorrow to fill 3 school board seats. 2 incumbents, Jill Gress and Susan Riley, are joined by Richard Dallinger, Kyle McGlade, and John Minshaw on the ballot. Polls are open from 7 in the morning until 8 at night. New sanctions hit the books tonight against the volatile regime of North Korea. How aggressive the diplomatic efforts are this time and what oil has to do with it. Next.
Looking for adventure this Labor Day?
Holy smokes. Oh man, that's pretty intense.
Look no further than Chevrolet.
This is a fast car. I feel like I left my soul back there.
Wow, this has power. Head to the Chevy Labor Day sales event and ride out the summer in a new Chevrolet. Current Chevy owners can use Labor Day bonus cash to get a total value of $11,600 on this Silverado All-Star, or get 0% financing for 72 months on all Tahoe and Suburban models. See your Heartland Chevy dealers.
We're children's physicians, the best place for kids for that next well check, flu shot, run-in with strep throat, or pink eye. With 13 metro area locations, we're right in your neighborhood. With same-day sick visits and extended hours for well checks, we're the convenient choice for busy families. Schedule an appointment online or call to set up a free get-to-know-you visit. Children's Physicians. We know children.
You can't put a price on safety. That's why every 2017 Toyota Corolla comes with lane departure alert, pre-collision system, dynamic radar cruise control, and automatic high beams, all at no extra charge. To get similar safety features in a Honda Civic, you'd have to pay $2,020 more. But Toyota Safety Sense comes standard on every 2017 Toyota Corolla. When it comes to safety, Toyota sets the standard. Tested, trusted, Toyota. Toyota, let's go places.
The 3 News Now Mobile Storm Tracker, sponsored by Jensen Tire and Auto.
The Trump administration went to the United Nations in response to North Korea's hydrogen bomb test. The UN Security Council passed a watered-down package of sanctions. Reporter Weijia Zhang on what it means.
The UN Security Council agreed to new sanctions in response to North Korea's latest nuclear test.
The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously.
The resolution bans all textile imports and prohibits countries from authorizing new work permits for North Koreans, but it does not include the ban on all oil imports from the country and freezing of assets.
North Korea's neighbors, its trading partners, and the entire international community are united against its dangerous and illegal actions.
The U.S. agreed to get rid of those elements in exchange for China's vote.
We have an enormous incentive to make it unanimous.
Dr. Jonathan Pollock studies Far East relationships for the Brookings Institute. He says China has become increasingly estranged from North Korea.
Their relationship now borders on a hostile relationship.
But he adds that China is also worried about a war on the Korean peninsula, so it is not willing to push North Korean leader Kim Jong-un too far. North Korea has warned of a harsh response against the U.S. for pushing these new sanctions. Weijia Zhang, CBS News, the White House.
Peru expelled North Korea's ambassador in protest of what it calls the North's repeated and flagrant violations of UN Security Council resolutions.
Now we're experiencing some incredible temperatures right now, sitting in the 70s with mostly clear skies. After midnight, we're in the 60s. I'll let you know just how chilly it will be in the morning after the break.
I'm Troy Trum, and I make finding the perfect home easier. Check out one of my latest listings.
This brand new home was built with the skill, precision, and detail you are looking for.
For your home dream, call the Trum team at 402-884-4848.
How do you become America's best-selling brand? You make it for those who don't always look out for themselves. You make it detect what they don't. Stop, stop, stop. You make it for 3 rows of precious cargo. Going further for whatever life throws at you. That's Ford, and that's how you become America's best-selling brand. Get 0 for 72 plus 1,000 cash back on select SUVs, and current Ford owners can get an extra 1,000 owner loyalty cash on Escape.
Wildberry? I've never had wildberry ice cream. Come on, honey, eat your broccoli. Why? Dr. Lacey says it's good for you. Who's that? My doctor. I see her every year. Why? Because she's super smart and works hard to keep me healthy. But why? So I can be around to make your kids eat broccoli.
More than 150 primary care doctors in 13 locations. Nebraska Medicine.
What happens when you save a child? Maybe you get them off the streets and into a home where they can thrive. Maybe they go on to serve their country, go to law school, or dedicate their life to helping others. When you save a child, you aren't just saving one child. you're breaking a chain of events that reaches far beyond one household. Sponsor a Boys Town family home and see for yourself. Visit boystown.org/sponsor today.
I'm Troy Trum. If you can't find the perfect home, call me, because I have access to many homes for sale that no one else knows about. The sooner you call me, the sooner we can find that perfect home. For your home dream, call the Trum team at 402-884-4848.
All right, weather alert meteorologist Jennifer Zeppelin is here. I have to keep reminding myself that it's not fall yet. I mean, the leaves are changing color on some trees, but it's still hot out.
11 days away, official kickoff to autumn. I know it's already felt like it. We're below average on our overall temperature for the month, but now we're about to go into a major warm-up, feeling a lot more like summer here in the coming days.
Weather did a U-turn.
It certainly did, and we may actually see some 90s, believe it or not, here over the next few days. High pressure is in control. What a quiet, dry stretch of weather we've been experiencing after just a few sprinkles, some showers yesterday, but now high pressure is in control. We had a weak front passing through. That just kind of washed out, so it's not really going to have a huge impact. If anything, it just provides us with a bit of a wind shift, and that is it. Totally different story out across the southeast. Irma still a major rainmaker, producing significant rainfall, flooding rains throughout the Carolinas. Just talked to some family earlier this evening that are in the South Carolina and the Charlotte area, and they've been dealing with some power outages kind of on and off throughout the evening hours because of some significant winds coming through. Even though this has decreased from a tropical storm to a tropical depression, still going to have a huge impact on that part of the country. So will we see anything from Irma? And the answer is no. We'll see some clouds moving in as close as Kansas City, and that's going to be about it. Then the storm system starts to take a little bit more of a right turn and then heads closer into Illinois. That's where the more significant rain is expected to be tomorrow, at least over Kentucky, Tennessee, the Appalachians. We'll see plenty of sunshine around, afternoon high temperatures in the 80s, and the warm-up begins to really take hold here Thursday into Friday. And we crank that thermometer up into the mid to even upper 80s, and notice a lot of 90s popping up out across the west. And then most of Irma just keeps kind of hanging out off to the east of us. Significant cloud cover, rain even around Indianapolis as we go into the middle part of the work week. So what can we expect for the next few days? Well, even warmer temperatures coming our way here on Thursday. I think that's going to be the warmest day of the week. Front back to the north of us stalls out over South and North Dakota. That will allow this area of high pressure over the desert southwest to pump a lot of warm air in our direction with that south-southwesterly flow, and afternoon high temperatures all the way from the heartland and down to the south into Oklahoma and Texas into the 90s, maybe even some triple-digit heat over the Texas Panhandle into Thursday. But right now it's beautiful outside. 71 degrees, relative humidity 66%, winds out of the southeast about 6 miles an hour. And if you do suffer from allergies, this may be the reason why you've been sneezing, a little bit congested here. The extended forecast the next 72 hours shows us in the medium to even high range. Looks like ragweed could be one of the biggest culprits here over the next couple of days. As far as our morning low temperature, 61 degrees, sunrise 7:01. And then we start working our way back up again. But notice this wind shift from the north-northeast, about 5 miles an hour. Light winds, plenty of sunshine, high temperature 87 here in town. Morning lows mid to upper 50s to near 60 degrees tomorrow afternoon. Gorgeous day, a little bit warmer. 83 Denison, 86 Lincoln, 86 in Beatrice. And right now I'm going to go with about 87 here in Omaha. Looking at about 83 in Bennington. This may be just about a degree or two cooler than what we're expecting, but I think overall temperatures above average. Our normal high this time of the year is around 80 degrees. 61 in Omaha in the morning, mostly clear skies. Our winds will be out of the northeast. We are a big sponsor of the Go Red event, the Expo tomorrow for the American Heart Association. Very excited to be a part of this tomorrow evening. 87 for the afternoon high temperature. And notice the extended forecast here as we go into the rest of the work week. 88 Wednesday, 90 on Thursday. Shave it down just a little bit Friday and Saturday. Heading to Lincoln for the Huskers game on Saturday. I'm looking at some late day showers, but for kickoff, dry conditions. Much cooler on Sunday with a high of 78. The overall threat for storms pretty low over the next few days, but always a good reminder, download the Storm Shield app.
Husker coach Mike Riley like you've never seen him in 3 seasons. Why the loss to Oregon is really bugging him a few nights later. That's next in sports.